I turned 74 on a Thursday, and the silence was so loud it made my chest ache. The phone sat there like a gravestone, cold and unforgiving. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for just 1 second, feel like this sounds familiar, please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to open these old wounds. My name is Margaret Walker, and I live in a small house on Maple Street in suburban Chicago, the same house where I raised my son Andrew after his father died 25 years ago, the same kitchen where I packed his lunches every morning before my double shifts, the same living room where I taught him to tie his shoes, where we watched cartoons on Saturday mornings when money was too tight for anything else. That Thursday morning, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. like I always do, not because I had anywhere important to be, but because my body forgot how to sleep past sunrise when Andrew was little, and I worked nights cleaning office buildings downtown. Old habits, I guess. They stick to your bones like arthritis. I put on my blue cotton robe, the one with small roses that Andrew bought me for Mother's Day 7 years ago, back when he still remembered holidays that mattered to me. The fabric is thin now, worn soft from countless washings, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. It still smells faintly of the lavender fabric softener I've used for decades, the same scent that used to make Andrew smile when he buried his face in my shoulder after nightmares. I made coffee in the same ceramic mug I've used every morning for 15 years, white with a small chip on the handle from when I dropped it rushing to get Andrew off to school. The coffee tasted bitter today, or maybe that was just the anticipation sitting on my tongue like copper pennies. I had circled October 15th on my kitchen calendar with a red pen 3 months ago. Not because I was planning anything special. I stopped throwing myself birthday parties when Harold passed. I circled it because I wanted to give them a chance. Just one phone call. One voice saying, "Happy birthday, Mom." That's all I needed. That's all I've ever needed. But as I sat at my small kitchen table, watching the numbers on my microwave clock change from 6 to 7 to 8 out, the phone remained silent. Not even the courtesy call from my dentist's office reminding me about cleanings I can barely afford. The house felt different that morning. Emptier somehow. The walls seemed to press in closer, and every creak of the old floorboards sounded like an accusation. You're alone, Margaret. You've always been alone. Even when they were here, you were alone. I tried to distract myself with my usual morning routine. I watered the African violets on the windowsill, the ones Olivia, Andrew's wife, once called old lady plants, with that laugh of hers that never quite reached her eyes. I folded the same kitchen towel 3 times, smoothing out wrinkles that weren't there. I reorganized the pill organizer that was already perfectly organized, my arthritis medication rattling like loose teeth in their plastic compartments. At 9:17 a.m., I broke down and checked my phone. Maybe I had missed a call. Maybe the ringer was too low. But the screen showed nothing. No missed calls. No text messages. No notifications of any kind. Just the time, mocking me with its steady progression toward a day I would spend entirely alone. I thought about calling Andrew myself. My finger hovered over his contact name for a full minute, trembling slightly from the medication I take for my heart condition. But what would I say? "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Just calling to remind you it's my birthday?" The words felt pathetic, even in my thoughts. A mother shouldn't have to remind her child that she exists. The morning stretched on like a punishment. I made myself a piece of toast with strawberry jam, the expensive kind I usually save for special occasions. If your 74th birthday isn't special enough for good jam, I reasoned, then what is? But it tasted like cardboard in my mouth, and I couldn't finish it. I found myself standing in front of the hallway mirror, studying the stranger looking back at me. When did my hair become so thin? When did these lines around my eyes become so deep? I used to be pretty, I think. Harold always said I was beautiful, even when I was too tired to believe him. He would trace the curve of my cheek with his calloused fingers and whisper, "There's my girl." Like I was still the 22-year-old he married instead of the worn-out woman staring back at me now. At 11:30, I made a decision that felt both brave and foolish. I would bake a cake, a small one, just for me. Vanilla with cream cheese frosting, the same recipe I used for Andrew's birthdays when money was tight, but love was abundant. I pulled out my old mixing bowls, the ones with the faded flowers that I got as wedding gifts 47 years ago, and I measured ingredients with the same careful precision I used to use when every cup of flour mattered to our grocery budget. The kitchen filled with the smell of vanilla and butter, and for a moment, I could almost pretend it was 1985 again. Andrew would come running in from the backyard, grass stains on his knees and wonder in his eyes, asking if he could lick the spoon. "Not yet, baby," I would say, "but you can help me frost it when it cools down." And he would hover by the oven, bouncing on his toes with 8-year-old impatience, making me laugh despite my exhaustion. But when the cake finished baking and I pulled it from the oven, the kitchen felt hollow again. No little hands reaching for the beaters. No excited chatter about whether we should use rainbow sprinkles or chocolate chips for decoration. Just me, a 74-year-old woman making a birthday cake that no one else would ever see. The frosting went on crooked. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, and my eyes aren't as sharp, but I managed to write "Happy Birthday, Margaret" in shaky blue letters across the top. Looking at it sitting on my counter, with one candle stuck in the center like a flag on conquered territory, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for years. Something deeper. Something that had been holding me together through sheer stubborn will. By 3 p.m., I had to face the truth that was sitting in my living room like an unwelcome guest. They had forgotten, not just overlooked or postponed. Forgotten. Completely and utterly forgotten that I existed on the day I was born, 74 years ago. I sat down at my kitchen table with the cake in front of me and lit the single candle. The flame danced in the afternoon light filtering through my lace curtains, casting small shadows that reminded me of the puppet shows I used to make for Andrew with my hands when he couldn't sleep. The wax began to drip, tiny white tears falling onto the frosting I had worked so hard to make perfect. I didn't sing. I didn't make a wish. I just watched that candle burn lower and lower until the flame finally gave up and died, leaving nothing but a thin ribbon of smoke and the smell of spent dreams. That's when I knew, with the kind of clarity that only comes from complete and utter heartbreak, that something fundamental had to change. I couldn't keep waiting for love that would never come. I couldn't keep hoping for consideration that had already been given to everyone else in the world except me. The phone never rang that day. Not once. But something else awakened in me as I sat there in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of birthdays past and the crushing weight of being utterly, completely forgotten. For the first time in my life, I started to get angry. The anger felt foreign in my chest, like swallowing something too hot that burned all the way down. I wasn't used to being angry. For 74 years, I had been the one who understood, who forgave, who made excuses for everyone else's thoughtlessness. But sitting there with melted wax on my birthday cake, I found myself remembering things I had buried so deep, I thought they were gone forever. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the old shoebox from under my bed, the one filled with receipts, bank statements, and memories I had saved like evidence of a life that mattered. My hands shook as I opened it, releasing the smell of old paper and faded ink that told the story of 3 decades of sacrifice. The first receipt I found was from 1995, Sears. A winter coat for Andrew, size 14, $89.99, more than I made in 2 days of cleaning offices, but he needed it for high school, and his old one had holes in both elbows. I remembered standing in that store, counting crumpled bills from my purse while the teenage cashier tapped her nails impatiently on the counter. Andrew had been embarrassed, slouching beside me and whispering, "Mom, everyone's looking." But I bought it anyway, because that's what mothers do. There were dozens more, hundreds maybe. School supplies when his father's life insurance ran out. Football cleats he wore for exactly 1 season before quitting the team. A prom tuxedo rental that cost me a week's worth of groceries. Each receipt a small financial decision that meant something else I couldn't have. New shoes for myself, a doctor's visit I put off, dinners that were just rice and beans again because meat was too expensive. But those weren't the sacrifices that really broke my heart. Those were just money. I found the letter I wrote to him when he turned 18, the one I never sent. My handwriting was neater then, before arthritis made my fingers curl like old tree branches. "My dearest Andrew," it began, "today you become a man. And I want you to know that raising you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every sleepless night, every worry, every moment I felt like I wasn't enough, it was all worth it to see you grow into the wonderful person you've become." I had written it the night before his birthday, sitting at this same kitchen table after working a 16-hour shift. I was going to give it to him with his breakfast, but when I got up to make his favorite pancakes, I found a note on the counter. "Gone to Mike's. Back later. Don't wait up." He never came home that day, or the next. When he finally returned 3 days later, he acted like nothing had happened. And I was so grateful to have him back that I didn't ask where he'd been. I never gave him the letter. The memories came flooding back like water through a broken dam. The time I cashed in my savings bonds, the ones I had been saving since Harold died, to pay for Andrew's college tuition, $23,000. Gone in one semester. He dropped out 3 months later to find himself, leaving me with nothing to show for my years of sacrifice, except a stack of bills and the humiliation of explaining to Harold's sister why I couldn't afford to visit his grave on the anniversary of his death anymore. "It's an investment in his future," I had told myself. "He'll understand someday." But understanding never came. When Andrew was 25, he started his own business. "Landscaping," he said. All he needed was a truck and some equipment, and he'd be able to support himself, maybe even support me for a change, he joked, though his laugh had an edge to it that made me wonder if he was really joking at all. I gave him my retirement fund. Every penny I had managed to save working 2 jobs for 15 years. $37,000. I signed the papers at the bank with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, while the banker looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for lost dogs. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Walker?" he asked. "This is your entire nest egg." "I'm sure," I lied. "It's for my son." Andrew hugged me when I handed him the check. Really hugged me, not the quick, obligatory embraces I had grown used to. For a moment, I felt like his mother again instead of just an obligation he had to manage. "I'll pay you back, Mom," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "With interest. You'll never have to worry about money again." That was 12 years ago. I never saw a penny of it back. The business failed within 2 years. Not because Andrew wasn't hardworking, but because he was 25 and naive and trusted the wrong people. The truck was repossessed. The equipment was sold. The debts piled up like autumn leaves, and suddenly my son who was going to take care of me was moving back into my house, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, and asking me to cover his car payments until he got back on his feet. I covered them for 3 years. When he met Olivia, everything changed. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are. Long blonde hair that always looked perfect, clothes that fit like they were made for her, a laugh that made men turn their heads on the street. She was also 28 years old, 6 years younger than Andrew, with a college degree and a job at a marketing firm downtown. The first time he brought her home for dinner, I spent 3 days planning the menu. I wanted everything to be perfect. I bought ingredients I couldn't afford and spent hours preparing Harold's favorite pot roast recipe, the one that always made the house smell like love and comfort. I set the table with my good china, the set I got as a wedding gift and only used for special occasions, and I even bought flowers for the centerpiece. Olivia took one look at the pot roast and said, "Oh, I'm actually vegetarian. Didn't Andrew mention that?" He hadn't. She picked at the vegetables while making polite conversation about the weather and asking pointed questions about the neighborhood. Was it safe? Were the schools good? How much were property taxes? I realized she wasn't just getting to know me. She was evaluating whether this was somewhere she could see herself living. After dinner, as I was clearing the dishes, I heard her whisper to Andrew in the living room, "It's very quaint. But honey, you can't live with your mother forever." 3 months later, Andrew announced they were getting an apartment together. A nice one in Lincoln Park, with a doorman and a fitness center and rent that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. I helped them move, carrying boxes up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, my back screaming with every step. Olivia directed the process like a general commanding troops, while Andrew tried to mediate between his girlfriend's vision of their new life and his guilt about leaving me alone. "You understand, don't you, Mom?" he asked as we loaded the last box into his car. We need our own space, but I'll visit all the time. Every weekend, I promise. The visits started out frequent. Every Sunday for dinner, just like old times. But gradually, they became every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then holidays only. Then just Christmas and Easter. And finally, just Christmas. Each time the visits became less frequent, there was a reason. Olivia was working late. They had plans with her friends. Her mother was visiting from Milwaukee and needed attention. Always something more important than the woman who had given up everything to raise him. The worst part wasn't being forgotten. The worst part was being replaced. Olivia's mother, Barbara, became Andrew's surrogate mom. She was everything I wasn't. Wealthy, sophisticated, connected to all the right people. She owned a boutique in Milwaukee and drove a BMW and took Olivia and Andrew on vacations to places I had only seen in magazines. When they got engaged, it was Barbara who helped plan the wedding. Barbara who went dress shopping with Olivia. Barbara who hosted the bridal shower in her perfectly decorated home while I sat at a table with people I didn't know, smiling and nodding while they discussed restaurants and wine selections that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I paid for the flowers at the wedding. White roses and baby's breath, arranged in simple bouquets that cost me $800, money I had been saving to fix my leaking roof. When Andrew thanked me in his speech, he mentioned the flowers last, after thanking Barbara for treating Olivia like the daughter she never had, and Olivia's father for welcoming him into the family with open arms. I clapped until my hands hurt, smiling until my face ached, pretending it didn't matter that I had been reduced to a footnote in my own son's gratitude. After they got married, the phone calls stopped entirely. I would call Andrew's cell phone and get voicemail. I would leave messages that went unreturned. When I finally reached him, usually after calling 3 or 4 times, he always sounded distracted, like I was interrupting something important. "Can I call you back, Mom? We're just heading out to dinner. Let me get back to you. Olivia's family is here for the weekend. I'll talk to you soon, okay? Things are just really crazy right now." Soon never came. 3 years after their wedding, Emily was born. My granddaughter. The baby I had dreamed about holding, rocking to sleep, reading stories to the way I had read to Andrew when he was small. I knitted her a blanket before she was born, yellow and white because they weren't telling anyone the gender. It took me 4 months to finish, working on it every evening while watching the news, dreaming about the day I would wrap my grandchild in something made with my own hands. When I finally got to meet Emily, she was 6 weeks old. Olivia held her the entire time, never offering to let me hold her, never suggesting I might want to feed her or rock her or simply look into her eyes without someone else's arms between us. When I asked if I could hold my granddaughter, Olivia hesitated and then said, "She just ate. Maybe next time." Next time never came either. Now, sitting in my kitchen with that shoebox of memories spilling across my table like accusations, I finally understood the truth I had been too afraid to face for years. I hadn't been building a relationship with my son. I had been funding my own abandonment. One sacrifice at a time. Was I used? The question hung in the air like smoke from that extinguished birthday candle. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the answer. The question haunted me through the weekend. Was I used? I found myself replaying conversations, analyzing gestures, searching for clues I had been too blind, or too desperate, to see at the time. Monday morning brought the first real answer. I was watering my small garden, the one I had planted last spring with tomatoes and herbs because eating fresh vegetables made me feel less poor, when I heard Emily's voice from the backyard next door. She was talking to her friend Madison, and they were close enough to my fence that I could hear every word. "My mom says we can't go to Grandma Margaret's house anymore," Emily said, her 7-year-old voice carrying that matter-of-fact tone children use when repeating adult decisions they don't understand. My hands froze on the watering can. "Why not?" Madison asked. "Because she's weird. She always wants to hug me and she smells like old people. Plus, my real grandma in Milwaukee buys me better presents anyway." The water kept pouring from the can, flooding the base of my tomato plant, but I couldn't move. I stood there like a statue, listening to my granddaughter explain why I had been deemed unworthy of her time. "My mom says old people don't understand how things work anymore," Emily continued. "Like, She still uses cash at stores and she doesn't know how to use a tablet or anything. It's embarrassing. I set the watering can down carefully, my hands shaking so badly I was afraid I would drop it. Through the slats in the fence, I could see Emily's blonde ponytail bouncing as she played hopscotch on her parents' expensive patio stones. She looked so much like Andrew at that age. The same stubborn chin, the same bright eyes. But Andrew had never been taught to speak about people with such casual cruelty. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to the grocery store where Emily's friend Madison's mother worked as a cashier. I wanted to see if what Emily said was true, if I really was as pathetic as Olivia made me sound. The store was crowded with the usual Monday shoppers, and I found myself studying how people paid for their groceries. Credit cards mostly. Some used their phones, waving them over a machine that beeped approvingly. When my turn came, I pulled out my small leather wallet, the same one Harold had given me for our 20th anniversary, and counted out exact change for my items. The teenage cashier sighed audibly. The woman behind me in line checked her watch with theatrical irritation. The cashier held up my $20 bill to the light, checking for counterfeits like I was some kind of criminal, while announcing to her coworker, "Cash customer." In the same tone she might have said, "difficult customer." I left the store feeling smaller than when I had entered. That evening I finally worked up the courage to call Andrew directly, not to complain about what Emily had said. I wasn't that kind of grandmother, the bitter one who caused trouble between parents and children. I just wanted to hear his voice, to feel connected to something, to someone. He answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear restaurant noise in the background. Clinking glasses, conversation, the sounds of people enjoying themselves. "Hey, Mom, can you make this quick? We're at dinner with Olivia's colleagues. I just wanted to say hello," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "See how you're doing?" "Yeah, we're good. Busy, you know. Emily started soccer, and Olivia got a promotion at work. Everything's crazy. Soccer. Emily was playing soccer, and I didn't even know. That's wonderful about Olivia's promotion," I managed. "And soccer sounds fun for Emily. Maybe I could come watch one of her games sometime?" There was a pause, a long one. In the background, I heard Olivia's laugh, bright and careless. "Well, the schedule's pretty packed," Andrew said finally. "And you know how Olivia feels about... Well, it's just complicated, Mom. With work and everything. Complicated. That's what I had become. A complication in my son's carefully curated life. Andrew, I need to ask you something." The words came out before I could stop them. "Do you remember my birthday last week?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Oh shit. Mom, I'm sorry. We had that thing with Olivia's parents and work has been insane and... It's okay," I lied, because that's what I always did. I just wondered. "We'll make it up to you," he said. But his voice was already distracted, already moving away from me. "Maybe dinner next week? I'll call you." He didn't call. The weeks that followed brought a series of small cruelties that accumulated like paper cuts, each one insignificant alone but collectively devastating. I would see them at the grocery store and wave, only to watch Olivia quickly steer Emily in the opposite direction. I would receive wedding invitations addressed to Andrew and Olivia Walker, with no mention of Margaret Walker, as if I had never existed. I would hear about family gatherings through neighborhood gossip, events I wasn't invited to, but apparently the entire extended family attended. The worst was Halloween. I had bought candy, good candy, not the cheap stuff, because I hoped Emily might bring her friends trick-or-treating to my house. I had decorated my front porch with pumpkins and friendly ghosts, the kind of display I used to create when Andrew was little, and the neighborhood kids would compete to see who got the best candy from Mrs. Walker. I sat by my front window from 5 to 9 o'clock, watching costumed children run from house to house, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. They came to every house on my street except mine. Even the houses with no decorations got visitors. But somehow, mine was invisible. Later, I found out why. Madison's mother told me at the post office the next day, with the kind of casual cruelty that some people mistake for honesty. "Oh, Olivia told all the parents not to bother your house," she said, sorting through her mail with manicured nails. "She said you weren't feeling well and didn't want to be disturbed. Isn't that thoughtful of her, looking out for you like that?" Thoughtful. That's what they called it when my daughter-in-law systematically erased me from my granddaughter's life. I drove home in a daze, the bag of untouched Halloween candy sitting beside me like evidence of my own irrelevance. That night, I ate 3 fun-sized Snickers bars for dinner and cried until I made myself sick. 2 days later, I made a discovery that shattered what remained of my faith in my son's love. I was cleaning out my filing cabinet, looking for my insurance papers, when I found a folder I had forgotten about. Inside were documents from when I had added Andrew's name to my bank account 5 years ago. For emergencies, I had told myself, in case something happened to me and he needed access to help with arrangements. I decided to check the account online, something I rarely did since I preferred paper statements. It took me 20 minutes to remember my password and figure out how to log in. Emily's assessment of my technical abilities wasn't entirely wrong, but when I finally accessed the account, what I saw made my blood freeze. Withdrawals. Dozens of them. Small amounts at first. $50 here, $100 there, but gradually increasing. Always on days when I wasn't likely to notice. Always for amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. Over the past 2 years, Andrew had taken nearly $8,000 from my account. $8,000. More than my entire Social Security income for 4 months. I scrolled through the transactions with growing horror. While I was eating generic cereal and buying my clothes at thrift stores, while I was skipping doctor's appointments because of copays I couldn't afford, my son was treating my bank account like his personal ATM. Some of the withdrawals corresponded to dates I remembered. The week before Emily's birthday, when he couldn't afford the expensive bike she wanted. The month when Olivia's car needed repairs. The weekend they went to Milwaukee for Barbara's 60th birthday party. A party I wasn't invited to. Funded with money stolen from my account. I printed every statement, my hands shaking so badly I could barely feed the paper into my ancient printer. Each page that emerged felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my son. This wasn't carelessness or forgetfulness. This was calculated theft, spread out over years, designed to never take enough at once to be noticed, but always taking enough to matter. The cruelest part was the timing. Many of the withdrawals happened on days right after I had called him, worried about money. Days when I had mentioned that my heating bill was high or that I needed to get my car inspected, but wasn't sure I could afford it. He would listen to me worry, make sympathetic noises, promise to see what he could do to help, and then withdraw money from my account to fund his own lifestyle. I sat at my kitchen table with those statements spread out like tarot cards predicting a terrible future. And I felt something break inside me that I knew would never heal. Not my heart. That had been broken so many times it was more scar tissue than organ. Something deeper, something fundamental about my ability to trust, to hope, to believe that love existed anywhere in the world. The phone rang. For one wild moment, I thought it might be Andrew, calling to confess, to apologize, to somehow explain away what couldn't be explained. But it was a robocall about my car's extended warranty, and I laughed, actually laughed, at the irony. The only people who called me anymore were strangers trying to sell me things I couldn't afford with money my son had already stolen. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. And I made a decision that would have terrified the woman I was a week ago. I was done being used. I was done being forgotten. I was done being the woman everyone could count on to understand, to forgive, to quietly absorb whatever cruelty they felt like dispensing. For the first time in 74 years, I was going to stop being understanding. The next morning, I got dressed carefully. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I wore to church before I stopped going because sitting alone in a pew made me feel more lonely than staying home. I did my hair and put on lipstick and drove to the bank like a woman with a purpose. Because finally, after 7 decades of putting everyone else first, I had one. I was going to save myself. The bank teller was a young woman named Sarah with kind eyes and the patience of someone who had helped many elderly customers navigate systems designed for people half their age. When I showed her the printed statements and explained what I had discovered, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine concern. "Mrs. Walker, I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said, her voice soft with sympathy that didn't feel patronizing. "Let me get my manager. We can remove your son's access immediately and set up alerts for any future transactions. Within an hour, Andrew Walker was no longer authorized to access my account. For the first time in 5 years, my money was truly mine again. Sarah also helped me set up online banking alerts, so I would receive a text message for any transaction over $25. "You did the right thing coming in," she assured me as I signed the paperwork with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Unfortunately, we see this more often than you might think. Family members who take advantage of trust. I drove home feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. It was a strange sensation, like flexing a muscle I had forgotten I possessed. But that feeling of empowerment lasted exactly 4 hours. At 3:17 p.m., my phone rang. "Mom?" Andrew's voice was tight with panic. "Something's wrong with the bank account. My card got declined, and when I called, they said I don't have access anymore." "Did something happen? Are you okay?" I had rehearsed this conversation in my mind during the drive home, but hearing his voice, the voice that used to call me Mommy and ask me to check for monsters under his bed, made my resolve waver. "I'm fine," I said carefully. "I just decided to make some changes to my banking arrangements." "Changes?" His confusion sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. "What kind of changes?" "Mom, you're scaring me. Did someone take advantage of you? Did you get one of those scam calls?" The irony was breathtaking. Here was my son, who had been stealing from me for years, worried that someone might be taking advantage of me. "Andrew," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I found the statements. All of them. I know about the withdrawals." Silence. Complete, damning silence that stretched between us like a chasm. "Mom, I can explain. $8,000, I continued. "Over 2 years. While I was eating cereal for dinner and skipping doctor's appointments because I couldn't afford the copays." "It wasn't like that." His voice had changed, becoming defensive, almost angry. "Those were emergencies. I was going to pay it back. I always pay you back." "When?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "When have you ever paid me back, Andrew? The college tuition? The business loan? The car payments? When?" Another pause. In the background, I heard Olivia's voice, urgent and questioning. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone, the same one she used when Emily tracked mud through their pristine house. "Look, this is ridiculous," Andrew said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught lying about where he'd been. "You're my mother. Families help each other. That money was just sitting there earning nothing anyway. Just sitting there. My emergency fund, my security blanket, my insurance against ending up homeless or hungry. Just sitting there, useless, until he found a better purpose for it. That money was my safety net," I said. "And you knew it. Every time you took it, you knew you were making me less safe." "Oh, come on, Mom. You're being dramatic. It's not like you were going to starve or anything. You always land on your feet. Always land on my feet. Like a cat. Like someone who chose to struggle instead of someone who was pushed into it by the people she trusted most." "I want it back," I said, surprising myself with how clear my voice sounded. "All of it. $8,247. I want it back within 30 days. Andrew laughed. Actually laughed. "Mom, be realistic. I don't have $8,000 just lying around. Do you know what our mortgage costs? What Emily's school expenses are? We're not exactly rolling in money here." "Then get a loan," I said. "Like I had to when you needed money for your business. Like I had to when you couldn't make your car payments. Get a loan and pay me back." "This is insane." His voice was rising now, and I could hear Olivia in the background, her tone sharp with alarm. "You're talking about destroying our family over money. Is that really what you want? To tear apart everything we have over a few $1,000s? A few $1,000s. That's what he called 2 years of my financial security. What family?" The words came out before I could stop them. "The family that forgets my birthday? The family that steals from my bank account? The family that tells their 7-year-old that her grandmother is embarrassing and weird? What are you talking about?" But his voice wavered, and I knew he knew exactly what I was talking about. "Emily told her friend Madison that she's not allowed to come to my house anymore because I'm weird and I smell like old people. She said Olivia told her that old people don't understand how things work anymore, that I'm embarrassing, The silence that followed was different from the others. This one felt heavy with guilt and recognition. Mom, kids say stupid things. Kids repeat what they hear from their parents. I interrupted. So I'm asking you, Andrew, is that what you think of me? Am I just an embarrassing old woman who doesn't understand anything? Of course not. But he said it too quickly, like someone giving the expected answer rather than the truthful one. Then why haven't you invited me to a single-family gathering in 2 years? Why don't I know that Emily plays soccer? Why did you tell the neighborhood parents not to bring their kids to my house on Halloween? We never said, "How did you look, Mom? You're obviously upset about something and you're not thinking clearly. Maybe you should talk to your doctor about this. Sometimes medications can cause confusion or don't." The word came out like a gunshot. Don't you dare suggest that I'm confused or medicated or not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years. The line went quiet again. When Andrew spoke, his voice had taken on a new quality, colder, more calculating. Okay, Mom, let's say you're right. Let's say I borrowed some money from the account. Let's say Olivia thinks you're difficult sometimes. What exactly do you want from us? An apology? Because fine, I'm sorry. We're both sorry. Can we move past this now? Borrowed. He called theft borrowing, and his apology felt like someone checking an item off a to-do list. I want you to respect me, I said. I want you to include me in your lives. I want you to stop treating me like an ATM and start treating me like your mother. And if we don't? The question was asked casually, but I heard the threat underneath it. What do you mean? Well, you're getting older, Mom. You live alone. What if something happens to you? What if you fall down those basement stairs or forget to turn off the stove? Wouldn't it be better if you were somewhere safer? Somewhere with people who could keep an eye on you? The words hit me like ice water. He was threatening to have me declared incompetent, to put me in a nursing home, to take away not just my money but my independence, my home, my freedom. Are you threatening me, Andrew? I'm just saying that families take care of each other. And sometimes that means making hard decisions for people we love, especially when they're not thinking clearly anymore. I sat in my kitchen, looking at the birthday cake I still hadn't thrown away, and felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger wearing my son's voice, a man who saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I'm thinking very clearly, I said. Clearly enough to know that you just threatened to have me committed if I don't give you access to my money again. That's exactly what you said. I stood up, surprising myself with how steady I felt. And it's exactly what you meant. I hung up the phone. Within minutes, it rang again. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times over the next hour, and each time I let it go to voicemail. I finally listened to the messages after dinner, a dinner of real food. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't worried about whether I could afford groceries next week. The first message was Andrew again, his voice conciliatory. Mom, I think we got our wires crossed. Can you call me back so we can talk about this like adults? The second was Olivia, her voice dripping with fake concern. Hi, Margaret. Andrew told me about your conversation today. We're worried about you. Maybe we should all sit down together and figure out how to help you through this difficult time. The third was Andrew again, frustrated. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just cut off your family because you're having some kind of episode. Call me back. The fourth was a number I didn't recognize. But when I played it, I heard Barbara's voice, Olivia's mother, the woman who had replaced me in every way that mattered. Margaret, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. Olivia gave me your number because we're all so concerned about you. I went through something similar with my own mother a few years ago. The confusion, the paranoia, the anger at family members who are just trying to help. There are wonderful facilities that specialize in these kinds of issues. I'd be happy to help you look into them. I deleted all 4 messages and sat in my living room as darkness fell around me, understanding with perfect clarity what was happening. They were circling the wagons, preparing to present a united front that portrayed me as a confused old woman who needed to be saved from herself. But I wasn't confused. For the first time in years, I was seeing everything exactly as it was. That night, I made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a reckoning. Every sacrifice I had made, every boundary I had let them cross, every time I had chosen their comfort over my own dignity. At the top of the page, I wrote a question that had been burning in my chest since my birthday. What would happen if I stopped? Stopped giving them money? Stopped making excuses for their behavior? Stopped accepting crumbs of affection and pretending they were enough to sustain me? Stopped being the mother they wanted and started being the woman I needed to be? The answer came to me with the force of a revelation. I would find out who I really was underneath all those years of self-sacrifice. And tomorrow, I was going to start discovering her. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I slept until 9 a.m. Not because I was tired, but because I could. Because for the first time in decades, I didn't have anyone to worry about except myself. No one to call and check on. No one whose problems needed solving before my own day could begin. The silence in my house felt different. Not empty, but peaceful. Like the quiet that follows a storm after all the debris has settled. I made coffee in my favorite mug and sat at my kitchen table with my list from the night before. In the morning light, my handwriting looked determined rather than desperate. Each item on the page represented a small act of rebellion against the life I had been living. The first thing I wrote down was simple. Buy something just for me. Ours? It had been so long since I had purchased anything that wasn't purely practical that I couldn't remember what I actually wanted. Clothes? Books? A plant for the kitchen? I realized with a shock that I had no idea what brought me joy anymore. Every purchase for years had been filtered through the question, "Can I afford this?" Followed immediately by, "Does Andrew need anything?" I got dressed carefully, choosing my best jeans and a sweater Harold had always said brought out my eyes. Then I drove to the mall, something I hadn't done for pleasure in years. The parking lot was busy with the kind of mid-morning shoppers I had never been able to be. Retired people, stay-at-home parents, people whose time belonged to themselves. I watched a woman my age emerge from her car with a spring in her step, carrying a small shopping bag and smiling like she had somewhere wonderful to be. When was the last time I had looked forward to something? Inside, the stores seemed brighter than I remembered. I wandered through a bookstore for the first time in years, running my fingers along book spines like old friends I had lost touch with. In the bargain section, I found a mystery novel with a grandmother detective as the main character, a woman in her 70s who solved crimes while everyone around her assumed she was just a harmless old lady. I bought it immediately. $7.99. For the pleasure of reading about someone who used people's assumptions about her age to her advantage instead of being diminished by them. Next, I went to a small boutique I had always admired but never entered because the clothes in the window looked expensive. The saleswoman, a woman about Olivia's age with genuine warmth in her eyes, greeted me like a welcome customer rather than someone to be tolerated. "I haven't bought anything just for fun in years," I admitted, feeling embarrassed by the confession. "I'm not even sure what I like anymore." She smiled with understanding. "Then let's figure it out together. What makes you feel like yourself?" The question caught me off guard. When did I last feel like myself? Before Harold died? Before Andrew moved back home? Before I became someone whose primary identity was being useful to other people? We spent an hour trying on clothes. Not practical clothes. Not clothes that would hide my age or my figure, but clothes that made me feel present in my own body. A soft emerald cardigan that brought out my eyes. A pair of jeans that actually fit instead of hanging loose because I had bought them on sale regardless of size. A scarf with colors so vibrant they seemed to illuminate my face from within. When I looked in the dressing room mirror wearing the new outfit, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked younger, but because I looked alive. The woman staring back at me had opinions about what she wore. She took up space. She mattered. The total came to $180, more than I had spent on myself in 6 months. My hand hesitated over my wallet for just a moment before I remembered. This was my money. Money that Andrew could no longer access. Money I could spend on making myself feel human again. Walking out of that store with my purchases felt like escaping from prison. At home, I hung my new clothes in my closet next to the faded, practical garments that had been my uniform for years. The contrast was stark. Life next to mere survival. I changed into the new outfit and made myself lunch, eating it slowly while reading the first chapter of my mystery novel. The grandmother detective was named Ruth, and in the opening scene, she was sitting in a police station trying to convince a young officer that she had witnessed a crime. He kept calling her ma'am, in that patronizing tone I knew so well, and suggesting she might have been confused, might have misunderstood what she saw. "Young man," Ruth said in the book, "I've been watching people for 76 years. I know the difference between confusion and clarity. The question is whether you're smart enough to listen." I laughed out loud. Actually laughed, for the first time in months. That afternoon, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I called an old friend. Rose Mendez had been my closest companion when Andrew was in high school, but we had drifted apart after Harold died, and my world shrunk to just me and my son's problems. I wasn't even sure if her number was still good. She answered on the second ring, and her voice filled with genuine delight when she realized it was me. "Margaret Walker. My God, I was just thinking about you last week. How are you, honey?" I paused, considering how to answer. "I think I'm just starting to figure that out." We talked for 2 hours. Rose told me about her volunteer work at the animal shelter, her pottery classes, the book club she had joined after her husband passed 5 years ago. Her life sounded full in a way mine had forgotten how to be. "You should come to book club," she said. "We meet every other Thursday at the library. Nothing too intellectual. Mostly we drink wine and argue about whether the romantic lead is worth the heroine's time." "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. "What about your family? How's Andrew? And that granddaughter of yours?" For the first time, I told someone the truth. Not the sanitized version I had been giving people for years, but the real story. The forgotten birthday, the stolen money, the systematic exclusion from my granddaughter's life. Rose listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Oh, honey," she said finally, "you've been carrying this alone for so long." "I thought it was normal," I admitted. "I thought this was just what happened when you got older. You became less important." "That's bullshit," Rose said, her voice fierce with indignation. "Getting older doesn't make you disposable. It makes you valuable in different ways. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve access to your wisdom." Wisdom? When was the last time anyone had suggested I possessed something worthwhile beyond my willingness to solve their problems with my checkbook? "I've been thinking about making some changes," I said carefully. "Good. It's about time you started living for Margaret instead of everyone else." That evening, I made my second decisive move. I called my insurance company and asked about adding a rider to my life insurance policy, one that would donate the entire payout to charity if certain conditions weren't met. The representative was helpful and patient, explaining how such arrangements worked. "It's called an incentive clause," she explained. "If your beneficiaries don't meet specific requirements, like maintaining a relationship with you, visiting regularly, or meeting other conditions you set, the money goes to your chosen charity instead." I made an appointment for the following week to discuss the details. For the first time since Harold died, I felt like I had power beyond just giving people money. I had the power to require them to earn it. That night, Andrew called again. This time, I answered. "Mom, thank God. We've been worried sick about you. When you didn't answer yesterday, we almost called the police to do a wellness check." A wellness check. Another way of saying they almost had strangers break down my door because I didn't respond to their calls fast enough. "I'm perfectly well," I said. "I was just busy." Busy with what? The question carried an edge of disbelief, as if the idea of me having activities that didn't revolve around them was impossible to comprehend. I went shopping. I had lunch with a friend. I read a book. Normal things that normal people do. "Oh," he sounded genuinely surprised. "Well, that's good, I guess. Look, Mom, about yesterday. I think we both said some things we didn't mean. Why don't we start over?" "I meant everything I said," I replied calmly. "Did you? What do you mean? Did you mean it when you threatened to have me declared incompetent? When you suggested I needed to be in a facility? Because those seemed like very deliberate threats to me." "I wasn't threatening you, Mom. I was just worried about you living alone. It's natural for families to be concerned about safety." "And the money? Was taking $8,000 from my account also natural family concern?" A long pause. I told you, I was going to pay that back. When? When I could afford it. Andrew, you bought a new car 3 months ago. You took Olivia and Emily to Disney World this summer. You can afford to pay me back. You just choose not to. Those were necessary expenses. Emily needed a vacation after the stress of starting a new school, and my old car was becoming unreliable. You wouldn't want Emily to be unsafe, would you? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it. Almost felt guilty for suggesting that my financial security mattered as much as Emily's vacation. Emily is your responsibility, I said instead. Her vacations and her father's car payments are not my financial obligation. My money is for my security, not your convenience. Fine. His voice had gone cold again. You want to play hardball? We can play hardball. But don't come crying to us when you realize how lonely life gets when you push away the only family you have. Andrew, I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. I've been lonely for years. The difference is, now I'm going to do something about it instead of waiting for people who don't care about me to suddenly start caring. I hung up before he could respond. Later that evening, I sat in my living room wearing my new emerald cardigan, reading about Ruth the grandmother detective as she methodically exposed the corruption that everyone else was too blind or too intimidated to see. She wasn't bitter about being underestimated. She used it as a tool. Outside my window, the neighborhood was settling into its evening routine. I could see lights coming on in houses where families were gathering for dinner, where grandparents were valued members of the household instead of problems to be managed. For the first time, instead of feeling excluded from that warmth, I felt motivated to create my own. Tomorrow, I would call Rose about that book club. I would make that appointment with the insurance company. I would continue the process of becoming someone who mattered to herself, even if she no longer mattered to the people she had given everything to create. Tonight, I would read my book and drink a cup of good tea and enjoy the profound silence of a house where no one expected anything from me except the pleasure of my own company. For the first time in my adult life, that felt like more than enough. The confrontation came on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after I had reclaimed my bank account. I was in my garden, transplanting the small rose bush I had bought myself the day before, another act of rebellion disguised as gardening, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. All of them. Andrew, Olivia, Emily, and Barbara. A united front marching across my lawn like an intervention army, armed with concerned expressions and the kind of determination that meant they had planned this carefully. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my new jeans, and watched them approach. Andrew looked haggard, like he hadn't been sleeping well. Olivia wore her serious conversation outfit, a tailored pantsuit that made her look like she was heading to a business meeting. Barbara carried a manila folder that I suspected contained brochures for senior living communities, and Emily hung back behind the adults, looking confused and uncomfortable. "Mom," Andrew said, his voice artificially bright, "we brought Emily to see you. She's missed her grandmother." I looked at my granddaughter, this beautiful child who had been taught that I was weird and embarrassing, and felt my heart crack a little. But I also noticed that she wasn't running toward me with the enthusiasm children usually show when they've missed someone. She was standing behind her mother like a shield, watching me with the wary expression of someone who had been coached about what to expect. "Hello, Emily," I said gently. "You look very pretty today." She mumbled something that might have been "thank you," and continued to avoid eye contact. "Margaret, dear." Barbara stepped forward with the kind of smile that wealthy women use when they're about to explain something to people they consider less sophisticated. "We're all here because we care about you. We've been talking, and we think it might be time to discuss some options that could make your life easier and safer." She opened her manila folder and pulled out glossy brochures featuring silver-haired models playing chess and tending gardens under the supervision of smiling staff members. "These are some lovely communities I've researched. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a house or managing finances. Where there are people around all the time to help with whatever you need." I took the brochures, not because I was interested, but because I wanted to see how far they were willing to take this charade. The facilities looked expensive, the kind of places where families paid premium prices to solve the problem of aging relatives with comfortable consciences. "They look very nice," I said mildly. I'm sure they cost quite a bit. That's not for you to worry about, Andrew said quickly. We've already talked to financial advisors about the best way to handle the transition. Selling this house would provide more than enough to cover the costs, with money left over for a nice nest egg. Selling my house. The house Harold and I had bought together. The house where I had raised Andrew. The house that held every memory of my adult life. They wanted to sell it to pay for warehousing me somewhere I would be out of their way permanently. And what would happen to that nest egg? I asked, still keeping my voice conversational. Well, we'd manage it for you, of course, Olivia said, speaking for the first time. These facilities handled day-to-day expenses, so you wouldn't need access to large amounts of money. We could take care of your financial needs and make sure everything is handled properly. They could take care of my financial needs. Like they had been taking care of them by stealing from my account for 2 years. I see, I said. And how exactly did you determine that I need this kind of care? Have I been forgetting to pay bills? Leaving the stove on? Getting lost while driving? The 4 adults exchanged glances, the kind of look that passes between people who have rehearsed this conversation and know they're approaching the difficult part. Mom, Andrew said, his voice taking on the patient tone people use with children and dementia patients. You've been acting very strangely lately, cutting off family access to accounts we've shared for years, making paranoid accusations about money, isolating yourself from people who love you. These are classic signs of cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. They were pathologizing my decision to protect myself from their abuse. And your solution is to take away my home, my independence, and my financial autonomy? Our solution is to make sure you're safe and cared for, Barbara said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that rich people mistake for kindness. These facilities have trained staff who understand the challenges of aging. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. I looked around at my garden, at the roses I had just planted, at the home I had worked 3 jobs to afford, at the life I had built with my own hands. Then I looked at these people who claimed to love me while planning to erase everything that made my life mine. Emily, I said, turning to my granddaughter, do you think your grandmother is crazy? The child's eyes went wide with alarm. She looked frantically between her parents and me, clearly desperate not to be put in the middle of adult drama she didn't understand. I don't know, she whispered. It's okay, sweetheart, I said gently. That's an honest answer. But let me ask you something else. Do you want to visit your grandmother? Another panic-stricken look at her parents. Maybe? Emily doesn't know what she wants, Olivia interjected sharply. She's 7 years old. Children her age can't make these kinds of decisions. But adults can make decisions about what children hear, I said, my voice finally carrying an edge. Adults can decide whether to tell a 7-year-old that her grandmother is weird and embarrassing. Adults can decide whether to poison a child's relationship with her family because it's convenient for their social lives. Nobody poisoned anything, Andrew said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Then why don't you ask Emily what she's been told about me? Ask her to repeat the things she's heard about why she can't visit my house anymore. This is exactly what we're talking about, Barbara said, her voice rising with artificial concern. This paranoid thinking, these accusations against family members who are just trying to help, these are serious warning signs, Margaret. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised all of us. You want to know what's really paranoid? I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. Thinking that I'm too stupid to notice $8,000 missing from my bank account. Thinking that I wouldn't figure out that you've been stealing from me for years while I ate cereal for dinner and skipped medical appointments because I couldn't afford the copays. We never stole anything, Olivia said, but her face had gone pale. No? Then what do you call taking money from someone's account without permission? What do you call using someone's emergency fund to pay for your vacations and car repairs while letting them worry about how they'll afford groceries? Those were family emergencies, Andrew said, his voice desperate now. You would have given us the money anyway if we had asked. But you didn't ask. You took. And you took it while listening to me worry about money, while watching me sacrifice things I needed because I thought I couldn't afford them. You let me suffer while you spent my money on luxuries. We're not here to relitigate the past, Barbara said, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. "We're here to talk about your future and what's best for everyone involved." "Everyone involved," I repeated. "You mean everyone except me?" I walked over to my porch and sat down on the steps, the brochures still in my hands. The others followed, forming a semicircle around me like I was some kind of curiosity they needed to examine. "Let me tell you what I think is happening here," I said, looking directly at Andrew. "I think you've gotten used to having access to my money. I think you've been counting on inheriting this house and whatever assets I have left. And now that I've taken control of my own finances, you're panicking because you realize you might actually have to pay your own bills for the rest of your lives." "That's not true," Andrew protested, but his voice cracked like a teenager caught in a lie. "Isn't it? When was the last time you visited me without needing something? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you included me in your lives because you wanted my company rather than my money?" The silence that followed was damning in its completeness. "I thought so," I said. "So let me make something very clear to all of you. I am not moving to any facility. I am not signing over my financial management to people who have already proven they can't be trusted with my money. And I am not going to pretend anymore that this is a loving family when you've made it crystal clear that I'm nothing more than a financial resource to be managed." "Mom, please," Andrew started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. Emily, sweetheart, look at me." My granddaughter reluctantly met my eyes, and I saw something there that broke my heart. Recognition. She understood, in the way children sometimes do, that the adults around her weren't being entirely honest. "I want you to know that I love you," I told her. "I want you to know that I will always love you, no matter what anyone tells you about me. And I want you to know that if you ever want to visit your grandmother, really want to, not because someone told you to or because it's convenient for the adults, you are always welcome in my home." Tears started streaming down Emily's face, and she took a small step toward me before Olivia's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "We're leaving," Olivia announced, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Come on, Emily. Say goodbye to your grandmother." "No," Emily said, her small voice carrying surprising strength. "I want to stay." "Emily, now," Olivia commanded, but Emily shook her head and took another step toward me. "I want to see grandmother's garden," she said, looking directly at me. "She planted flowers." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Andrew stepped forward and gently took Emily's hand. "Maybe another time, sweetheart," he said, but his voice was sad rather than authoritative. As they walked back toward their cars, I heard Olivia speaking urgently to Barbara about next steps and legal options. I heard Andrew trying to calm them both down, suggesting they give it some time. But I also heard Emily's small voice asking, "Why can't I visit grandmother? She seems nice." And I heard the silence that followed her question, the silence of adults who couldn't explain their cruelty to a child without admitting what they really were. After they left, I sat in my garden for a long time, surrounded by the roses I had planted and the life I had chosen to reclaim. The brochures lay scattered on my porch where I had dropped them, their glossy promises of managed care blowing around in the autumn breeze like the lies they were. I thought about Emily's tears and her small act of rebellion. I thought about the fear in Andrew's eyes when I mentioned the missing money. I thought about the calculation in Barbara's voice as she planned my future without consulting me. And I realized that for the first time in this entire ordeal, I wasn't sad or angry or hurt. I was free to make my own choices about my own life, free to love the people who actually wanted my love, free to stop carrying the weight of other people's expectations and disappointments. That evening, I called my lawyer. The lawyer's name was Thomas Chen, and he was Margaret's daughter, the same Margaret who managed Parker's Market where I used to shop before I started avoiding places where people might ask about my family. Thomas was in his 40s, spoke with the confidence of someone who had handled plenty of family financial abuse cases, and most importantly, he listened to my entire story without once suggesting that I was confused or dramatic. "Mrs. Walker," he said after I finished explaining everything, "what you're describing is unfortunately common. Adult children who view aging parents as financial resources rather than people deserving of respect and autonomy. The good news is that you have options. Over the next 2 hours, we discussed those options in detail, changing my will to ensure that my assets would go to charities rather than people who had already proven they couldn't be trusted with my money, setting up a trust that would make it impossible for anyone to challenge my mental competency as a way to gain control of my finances. Most importantly, creating a legal buffer that would protect me from future attempts to have me declared incompetent. The threats your son made about having you committed, Thomas explained, are actually evidence of coercive behavior that we can use in your favor. Courts don't look kindly on family members who threaten elderly relatives with institutionalization as a way to gain financial control. I left his office with a thick folder of documents and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Harold died, I had an advocate, someone whose job was to protect my interests rather than manage them away from me. The next week, I did something I had been dreaming about for months. I booked a trip. Not a practical trip to visit family who didn't want to see me, but a real vacation. A cruise to Alaska, something Harold and I had always talked about doing but never could afford when we were younger, and I was too busy caring for everyone else to consider when I was older. The travel agent was a cheerful woman named Lisa who specialized in solo travel for seniors. She didn't seem at all surprised that a 74-year-old woman wanted to take a cruise by herself, and she didn't ask invasive questions about why I wasn't traveling with family. Alaska is perfect for first-time solo cruisers, she said, spreading brochures across her desk. There are plenty of activities, beautiful scenery, and the cruise demographic tends to be people who actually want to talk to each other rather than just party. I chose a 2-week cruise departing in 6 weeks with a balcony cabin that would let me watch the sunset over the ocean every evening. The cost was more than I had spent on myself in the previous 5 years combined, but as I handed over my credit card, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Anticipation. Pure, selfish, wonderful anticipation for something that was entirely mine. That evening, Rose came over for dinner, the first guest I had entertained in my home in over 2 years. I cooked Harold's famous lasagna recipe, opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion that never came, and we talked until almost midnight. "You look different," Rose said as we sat in my living room with our second glass of wine. "Not just the clothes, though they're lovely. You look like yourself again." "I feel like myself again," I admitted. I didn't realize how much of me I had lost until I started trying to find her. "What's next?" Rose asked. "Besides the cruise, which sounds absolutely wonderful." "I don't know," I said, and realized that not knowing felt liberating rather than terrifying. For the first time in my adult life, my future isn't defined by what other people need from me. It's whatever I want it to be. The following Thursday, I attended my first book club meeting. The library conference room was filled with 8 women between the ages of 55 and 80, and they welcomed me with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The book we were discussing was about a woman who inherited her grandmother's bakery and discovered family secrets that changed her understanding of her entire history. "The thing that bothers me," said a woman named Janet, who wore purple glasses and spoke with the authority of someone who had read everything ever written, "is how long the protagonist spent trying to please people who clearly didn't appreciate her efforts. Sometimes it takes a crisis to make you realize you've been living someone else's life instead of your own," added another woman, Patricia, who had silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent years teaching high school students. The protagonist had to lose everything she thought she wanted before she could figure out what she actually needed. I found myself nodding along, feeling like these women understood something fundamental about female experience that I had never been able to articulate. After the official discussion ended, several of us went to a nearby coffee shop and continued talking about books, life, and the strange freedom that came with reaching an age where other people's expectations mattered less than your own peace of mind. "You should come to our monthly dinners too," Rose suggested as we walked to our cars. "We take turns hosting and cooking something completely impractical. Last month, Helen made a 7-layer cake just because she felt like it. A 7-layer cake just because she felt like it. When was the last time I had done anything just because I felt like it? 3 weeks before my cruise, I made another decision that would have terrified the old Margaret. I hired a house sitter. Not because I needed someone to water plants or collect mail, but because I wanted the peace of mind that comes with knowing someone was keeping an eye on things while I was gone. The sitter was a graduate student named Anna who was studying library science and seemed delighted by the prospect of staying in a quiet house with a garden where she could read and work on her thesis. "I promise to take good care of everything," she said as I showed her around the house. "And I love to garden, so I'll make sure your roses are well watered." My roses. Not roses I had planted for someone else's enjoyment, but roses that belonged to me and would be cared for by someone who appreciated their beauty rather than seeing them as another burden to manage. The night before I left for Seattle to board my cruise ship, Andrew called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear what he had to say. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying a weariness I hadn't heard before. "I wanted to call before you left on your trip." "How did you know about my trip?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned it when Olivia saw her at the grocery store." "Mom, I need you to know that I never meant for things to get this bad between us." I sat in my living room, surrounded by the suitcases I had packed for my first real vacation in 20 years, and waited for him to continue. "I know you think I was stealing from you, but I always intended to pay that money back. I just got overwhelmed with bills and Emily's expenses, and it was easier to borrow from the account than to ask for help and feel like a failure again." Borrow. He was still calling it borrowing. "Andrew," I said, my voice gentler than it had been in our recent conversations, "do you know why I'm going on this cruise? Because you're angry at us?" "No. I'm going because for the first time in my adult life, I have money to spend on something I want instead of something someone else needs. Do you understand the difference?" A long pause. "I think so. I spent 30 years working multiple jobs to support you and give you opportunities I never had. I gave you my retirement savings to start a business that failed. I gave you money whenever you asked for it and even when you didn't ask but just took it. And in all that time, do you know how many times I spent money on something just for the joy of it? Mom, 0. I continued. 0 times. Every dollar I earned went to keeping us housed and fed and giving you the chance to become whatever you wanted to become. And what I wanted, what I needed, never factored into those calculations. I know I made mistakes," Andrew said, and for the first time in months, his voice carried genuine emotion rather than manipulation. "I know I took advantage of your generosity. I just don't know how to fix it now." "You fix it by respecting me," I said. "You fix it by treating me like a person instead of a problem to be managed. You fix it by letting Emily have a relationship with her grandmother based on love instead of convenience. Olivia says it's too late for that. She says you'll always hold this against us." "What do you say, Andrew? Not what Olivia says. What do you think?" Another long pause. "I think I miss my mom. And I think I've been so focused on what you could do for us that I forgot to think about what we should be doing for you." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes acknowledgement was the first step toward something better. "I'm going on this cruise," I said. "I'm going to watch glaciers and northern lights and eat food I didn't have to cook. I'm going to meet new people and read books and remember what it feels like to have adventures. And when I come back, if you want to try to rebuild our relationship on different terms where I'm respected as a person with my own life and needs, then we can talk about that. And if I don't?" he asked quietly. "Then I'll be sad, but I'll be okay. Because I've learned something important, Andrew. I've learned that I don't need to be loved by people who don't know how to love me properly. I deserve better than that. And so do you, honestly. You deserve to have relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I had never experienced before. Complete contentment with my own company. I wasn't waiting for anyone to call or visit. I wasn't worried about anyone else's problems or needs. I was simply present with myself, and that felt like enough. The next morning, Anna arrived early to see me off. She brought flowers from her own garden, bright yellow daisies that she arranged in a vase on my kitchen table. "For when you come home," she said, "so the house feels welcoming when you walk through the door." As I drove toward the airport, my suitcases full of clothes I had chosen because they made me happy, my purse containing a passport that would soon be stamped with evidence of my adventures, I thought about all the women who had helped me remember who I was. Rose, who had maintained friendships while I was losing myself in other people's needs. The book club women who understood that sometimes you had to lose everything to find yourself. Lisa, the travel agent who didn't question a woman's right to explore the world on her own terms. Anna, who brought flowers just to make someone else's homecoming brighter. These were the relationships I wanted to nurture now. Connections based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and financial dependence. As the plane lifted off from Chicago, carrying me toward the first adventure I had ever taken entirely for myself, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a young woman: excitement about what tomorrow might bring. 6 months later, I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and pink, drinking coffee from a mug I had bought in Juneau, one that said, "Alaska or bust," with a cartoon whale on the side. It was exactly the kind of touristy souvenir I used to think was silly, but now it made me smile every morning because it reminded me of the day I stood on the deck of a cruise ship watching humpback whales breach in waters so blue they looked like liquid sky. The cruise had been everything I had hoped for and more. I met a retired teacher from Portland who taught me to play bridge. I had dinner conversations with a widower from Texas who collected vintage postcards and knew more about glacial formation than most geology professors. I watched the northern lights dance across the sky while wrapped in a blanket on the ship's deck, crying happy tears for reasons I couldn't articulate but didn't need to. Most importantly, I had 2 weeks where no one needed anything from me except pleasant conversation and the occasional fourth person for card games. 2 weeks where my time was entirely my own, where I could read until 2 a.m. or take afternoon naps or spend an entire day just watching the ocean without feeling guilty about productivity or usefulness. I came home to find Anna had not only cared for my garden beautifully, but had also left a folder of photographs she had taken of my roses throughout the 2 weeks, documenting their progress like a proud grandparent. The pictures showed my garden thriving under the care of someone who appreciated its beauty, rather than seeing it as another chore to manage. "I hope you don't mind," Anna had written in a note, "but I invited my thesis advisor over for coffee one afternoon, and she fell in love with your garden. She asked if you might be interested in joining the local Master Gardener program when you get back. I told her I thought you might be." The Master Gardener program. I had looked into it years ago but never followed through because Andrew always seemed to have some crisis that required my attention just when I was ready to do something for myself. Now, I had the freedom to explore interests I had abandoned for decades. I enrolled the week after I returned from Alaska. The program was rigorous, 40 hours of training covering everything from soil science to plant pathology, but I loved every minute of it. My classmates ranged from young professionals wanting to start urban gardens to retirees like me who had finally reached the stage of life where they could pursue passions instead of obligations. "You have a real intuition for this," our instructor, Dr. Sarah Martinez, told me after I successfully diagnosed a fungal problem that had stumped several other students. "Have you considered becoming a volunteer educator? We're always looking for people who can teach others about sustainable gardening practices." 6 months ago, the idea of teaching anyone anything would have seemed impossible. I was just the old lady whose own family found her embarrassing and obsolete. But now, standing in a greenhouse surrounded by people who valued my knowledge and insights, teaching felt like a natural extension of who I was becoming. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was Emily. "Grandma, Dad showed me the pictures you sent from Alaska. The whales are so cool. Can you tell me about them when I come visit next week?" Next week. Emily was coming to visit next week without her parents, because Andrew had finally found the courage to suggest that his daughter might benefit from spending time with her grandmother. It had taken months of careful conversation, with him slowly recognizing that my unreasonable behavior had been a response to years of being treated as a financial resource rather than a family member. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks after I returned from my cruise. Andrew called on a Tuesday evening, his voice shaky with something that might have been tears. "Mom," he said, "Emily asked me today why you don't come to her soccer games anymore." And I realized I couldn't give her an answer that didn't make me sound like a terrible son. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her the truth, that we had hurt your feelings and you needed some space from us. And she asked if that meant you didn't love her anymore." His voice broke completely then. "Mom, I had to tell my 7-year-old daughter that her grandmother loves her but doesn't trust her parents. Do you know how that felt? How do you think it felt to be excluded from her life? I asked quietly. How do you think it felt to be told I was too embarrassing to be around her friends? I know, and I'm sorry, really sorry. Not just sorry because I got caught. Olivia and we've been talking, a lot, about how we treated you, about what kind of example we were setting for Emily. And we want to try to fix this, if you'll let us. If it's not too late. It wasn't too late, but it also wasn't simple. Rebuilding trust after years of financial abuse and emotional manipulation required more than apologies. It required consistent changes in behavior, respect for my boundaries, and acknowledgement that I was a person with my own life and interests rather than just Emily's grandmother and Andrew's mother. The first family dinner after my return from Alaska was awkward. Olivia barely spoke, clearly struggling with the fact that I was no longer the accommodating woman who accepted whatever crumbs of attention they felt like offering. Emily kept staring at me like I was someone she was meeting for the first time, which in a way, she was. But slowly, carefully, we began building something different. Emily started calling me once a week to tell me about school and friends, and the books she was reading. Andrew visited without asking for money or expecting me to solve his problems. Even Olivia, to her credit, made efforts to treat me with basic courtesy rather than the patronizing tolerance I had grown used to. The real test came when Emily asked if she could spend a weekend with me, just the two of us, like a real grandmother and granddaughter. "Are you sure you're up for that?" Olivia asked, and I could hear her struggling between her protective instincts and her recognition that she no longer had the right to make decisions about my capabilities. "I raised a child," I reminded her gently. "I think I can handle a 7-year-old for a weekend." That weekend was magical in ways I hadn't expected. Emily helped me plant bulbs for next spring's garden, carefully spacing them according to the instructions I had learned in my Master Gardener class. She asked endless questions about the cruise and insisted on looking at every single photograph I had taken. We baked cookies using my grandmother's recipe, and she listened with rapt attention to stories about her great-great-grandmother, who had come to America with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone thought possible. "Grandma," Emily said as we sat on my porch swing watching fireflies dance in the twilight, "Mom says you used to be sad all the time, but you don't seem sad now." "I'm not sad now," I told her, thinking about how to explain complicated adult emotions to a child. "I learned something important, Emily. I learned that I have to take care of myself before I can take care of other people. And I learned that the people who really love you want you to be happy, even if that means they can't always get what they want from you. Like how I can't have ice cream for dinner even though I want it, because you love me and want me to be healthy? Exactly like that," I said, marveling at how clearly children could see truths that adults spent years avoiding. That night, after Emily was asleep in the guest room that had been gathering dust for years, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about the journey that had brought me here. The forgotten birthday that had seemed like the end of the world now felt like the beginning of my real life. My phone rang. It was Rose, calling from the airport. "I just wanted to let you know I made it safely to Phoenix," she said, "and to thank you again for encouraging me to take this trip. I never would have had the courage to visit my sister if you hadn't shown me that it's never too late to do something just because it makes you happy." After we hung up, I pulled out the journal I had started keeping since my return from Alaska. Every evening, I wrote down one thing I had done that day just for myself, not for duty or obligation or to make someone else's life easier, but simply because it brought me joy or satisfaction or peace. Today's entry was easy. Taught Emily how to deadhead roses and watched her face light up when she realized she was helping them bloom more beautifully. Tomorrow I would write about the book club meeting where we would discuss a novel about a woman who inherited a bakery. Next week I would write about Emily's visit and the stories we would share over homemade pancakes. Next month I would write about the community garden project I was organizing through the Master Gardener program. And next year, I might write about another cruise, or a pottery class, or a visit to the friend I had reconnected with after 20 years of lost contact. The future felt open in a way it hadn't since I was young, full of possibilities I was finally free to explore. The house settled around me with the comfortable sounds of a home that was truly mine. Not a place where I waited for other people to visit or call or need something, but a sanctuary where I could be completely myself. The woman who had sat in this same kitchen 6 months ago, crying over a forgotten birthday and a single candle that died unnoticed, felt like someone I had known long ago, but no longer recognized. I thought about all the women who might be sitting in their own kitchens tonight, feeling invisible and unimportant, waiting for love that would never come from people who saw them only as resources to be managed. I thought about the letters I was planning to write to organizations that helped older women escape financial abuse. I thought about the story I might tell at the next book club meeting about finding yourself at 74 and realizing that the best chapters of your life might still be unwritten. But mostly, I thought about Emily's laugh when she discovered that the roses she had helped tend were blooming in colors we hadn't expected, deeper reds and brighter yellows than the catalog had promised, as if they were responding to the love and attention they were finally receiving by becoming more beautiful than anyone had imagined possible. Sometimes, I realized, that's all any of us need to flourish. Someone who sees our potential instead of our problems. Someone who tends to us with patience and hope instead of obligation and resentment. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we learn to become that someone for ourselves. The last thing I wrote in my journal that night was a question for anyone who might read it someday. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever loved people who saw you only as what you could provide rather than who you really are? If you have, know this: it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand respect instead of accepting scraps. It's never too late to discover that your worth isn't determined by how useful you are to other people, but by the simple fact that you exist and deserve love, especially from yourself. Leave a comment if you've ever had to walk away from people who claimed to love you but treated you like you were disposable. Your story matters, and you're not alone. And if this message helped you see your own situation more clearly, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our truth so others know they have permission to claim theirs.